Have you ever wondered what is the secret that makes character relationships in books absolutely scintillating? Well, we're going to dive into that, as well as a whole host of other topics such as antiheroes, how to work with them, villains, how should we humanize them or not, and so much more in today's episode. I can't wait for you to hear it. Hey friend, do you love the smell of books? Maybe you absolutely delight in the sound of a pen gliding across a page as you write. Hi, my name is Shira Rodriguez, and I am a Jesus follower, a writer, entrepreneur, and lover of all things boho and books. In this podcast, I want to take you on a journey of discovering yourself, discovering God and your passions, and how to make your life beautiful and so full that it overflows into the lives of others. And over here, we are not about compartmentalizing life. Oh no. Over here, we talk about holistically taking your life and presenting it as a place where others can be blessed just by knowing you. Are you excited? I am. So snag your favorite mug of tea or a pen and paper and let's jump in. Because you're listening to Her Reading Life podcast. Hey listeners, welcome to another episode of Her Reading Life podcast. My name is Shira Rodriguez, and I am so delighted that you're here. If this is your first time, welcome. My name is Shira. I am a novelist and a podcaster, and honestly, in this podcast, I hope that you feel welcomed and just feel like we're talking across from each other at a coffee shop or, just talking like old friends and enjoying writer community, reader community, and just being able to explore the beauty of life from the perspective of words and literary goodness. In last week's episode, I introduced 3 amazing male writers who came onto my podcast, and I gave a whole little spiel story on how they came on and the story behind that. But I am so excited to share part 2 of my conversation with them. In our previous episode, we actually talked a little bit about strong female characters and why it's working or not working in some cases, and how to actually create a dynamic character that is strong but in the right ways and that doesn't come across as annoying or toxic. Now, in today's episode, we're actually going to dive into what guys actually want to read in books, which I feel like nobody really talks about. I don't know why. And these guys were so incredibly kind to actually talk about what they'd like to see in books in general. So that was so exciting. We're also going to be diving into antiheroes and how to create good antiheroes, how to play with them, the morally gray character. We're also going to cover misunderstanding tropes and relationships. Yes, you heard me. We're going to talk about romantic and platonic relationships and how you can use these as tools in your story to their greatest potential, because so many times we do this wrong by pitting them against each other instead of having them work together in harmony. And that's when you get the magic to happen. So I'm so excited for you to listen to this episode and cannot wait to hear your thoughts on this. Yeah, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on what male readers actually want to read in fiction. Like, what are some characters and what are some things you'd like to see fiction do in future books, or maybe even something that you're trying to do in your own books? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Byron.
I think that, and we're trying to start to see a revival in it more, but people just want to
Mm-hmm.
see virtue in characters again, and
Mhm.
they want to see heroes who are actually heroes and not protagonists who are as wicked as the villain is. And I think another thing is that people are wanting true villains again, because there's a difference between understanding a villain and then being driven to the point where you're cheering for the villain.
Mhm.
And I think people are just wanting that clear line in the sand between black and white, right and wrong in these stories, and that these morally gray themes are just getting tiresome to a lot of people.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
I would agree with that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jaden.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. It's very Canadian exchange right there. Uh, so I think I would really agree with Byron. And when we have characters who are morally gray, I think that what's important is that the consequences of of that are shown. And so I do think that there's actually still really a place for instance, for negative arcs. I love a good negative arc
Oh,
in
absolutely.
story.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure Byron, you would agree. But I think when you do that, it has to be done right. So to go off of what you were saying about villains, Kylo Ren is a perfect example of a villain who kind of just does crazy stuff with no consequences, and then at the end has an unbelievable conversion where there's really no cost or sense of conclusion after all of the stuff that he's done. And I'm not saying that we should be focused on punishment or retribution, but we do have to show the human cost at the very least. Like even if there's total forgiveness and no punishment or justice is ever inflicted, we have to actually reconcile with what has been done by the characters in the book and the consequences that has.
Yeah.
And I think often people leave that out either in the name of character redemption and grace, or for even sillier reasons like the character's hot, so therefore they get away with things or something.
Yeah, there's a huge romanticization of just this morally gray trend, but also of just being a victim. And so it's the writer trope. We riddle our characters with these horrific pasts. And so the trend is for these people to embrace their wounds, and instead of allowing room for healing or seeking healing and rising above their past and their flaws, they're just letting their wounds fester, and they just want to soak in the mire of their lowly state. And so it's and like I see this on social media all the time, and just people would rather relate to that because it's easier to, and they don't want to be reminded that they're in a bad spot right now and that they should be pursuing something higher and nobler, that true heroes remind them of, that it is possible to rise above these challenges and temptations instead of giving in to them.
One of the things I find really interesting in the Red Rising trilogy is that the main character Darrow, I'll spoil the first couple of chapters because it's not very far in, but in the first few chapters, his wife Io is killed by the government, executed for basically doing a dance and song that is forbidden because it has undertones of rebellion.
Braveheart
And
moment.
so, sorry,
Braveheart moment.
Exactly. And so that is really his motivation for much of the first book, is basically revenge against those who've hurt him. And it's a very well-worn trope, and it has a few notes of, the wife in the fridge trope, where it's like the wife who died solely so that the main character has a reason to do what he does. But what's really interesting about that is that in the second book, Darrow revisits his homeland and realizes that he's made Io in his mind to be something that she's not. He's romanticized her and he's glorified her, even though she was just a teen at that point. They were married very young. And he realizes, like, no, she was actually like just a girl, and she had petty moments, and she sometimes lashed out at people. And so even though Darrow is far from being kind of this bastion of strength or positive masculinity, like, he has a lot of flaws, he has to constantly deal with those, and there's this constant sort of tension between the man he could be and kind of the way that the darkness around him is kind of forcing him into this corner where he's making choices he doesn't want to make. And so I think that's also Darrow's character is just really compelling for me, even though he's not at all noble.
Yeah, you can get some really powerful moments and themes out of character arcs like that, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think, like you're saying, it's also really encouraging to see more noble characters. That's something I'm trying to do in my current book, is just have a character that people actually want to cheer for, and who inspires the people around him to be more than they are. I think there's a lot of power in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to Kylo Ren, the
We all hate Kylo Ren.
we all hate
Right,
Kylo
I was gonna say the hated Kylo Ren.
But what's really funny is like how so many people agree, not just about Kylo Ren or the Star Wars sequels. I mean, I do have a friend who said the Star Wars sequels are great, and we were ready to tackle him. But
Yes.
but how many people agree that they want to see stories with virtuous characters or characters who are very clearly evil? especially like on social media, like a lot of people I follow, or just when I'm scrolling, like I see people who are like, stop putting these morally gray, horrible characters in your books and glorifying them, or these super toxic relationships or whatever.
Yep.
Are you sure that
but-
wasn't Byron?
Wait, what?
I do take shots at that community a
Maybe it
lot,
was.
and I
Maybe
enjoy
it
it.
was. Maybe it was. Yeah. But it is something I've noticed, like even just all across like social media. It's really interesting how people really want to see something different. I mean, also going back to Dune, that's one example of a character arc, like a negative character arc for the main character that I think is done well, because
Yes.
Paul Atreides is not a good guy, but it's not
No.
glorified.
No.
No, he's not a good guy at all. But it's not glorified. It's not said, oh, you should be like this. It's very clearly criticized. And a lot of people, I haven't read the second book yet, but a really good friend of mine, he said the second book is his favorite. And he said the reason why is because Frank Herbert took all the characters that you love and he made them human,
Wow.
which a lot of people didn't like. But it was very realistic in terms of like how their situation would have unfolded, how these people would have reacted in real life, not just some sort of glorified, romanticized, oh, they're like all they're completely good in every way. It's very clear that they're good. There's a lot of moral grayness in the characters. Now, there are some characters that are very clearly good characters, virtuous characters, like, I mean, you look at the Duke, he's a very clear, virtuous character. You look at Stilgar, also a very clear, virtuous character. But all the rest of the people are not good people. All the rest of the characters are not good people, and it's very clear why. And that's one example I think is where it's done well. Nowadays, you see books like I'm not naming any names, but Shatter Me. But so many books like Shatter Me, like where the romantic love interest has killed like thousands of people, and she's like, oh, it doesn't matter. And I blame Twilight for perpetuating this, but
that trope is infuriating, where it's like you should go for the guy who would burn the world for you instead of sacrificing you for the world. I'm like, no, thank you. No, that's bad.
don't
That's
do
a
that.
red
No.
flag. That's a huge red flag.
Yeah, absolutely, really big red flag. And I mean, even in the first Twilight movie, she says, I want to be with you, and he says, I've killed people, and she says, it doesn't matter.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember watching that and just screaming at the screen like, yes, it does matter. What are you saying? Yeah, but it was, I do blame a lot of books like that for perpetuating this sort of like, romanticized idea of like, oh, he's an anti-hero. No, he's just a villain who's murdered a bunch of people. But the only character trait that he has that's supposedly great is that he's attractive. And that's the extent of his character. He kills people and he's attractive, and that's why he's a good guy. It's like, no, that's completely wrong.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's like this really weird like bad boy trend kind of thing. There's a lot of people who like really make videos like books where the villain gets the girl, and they like list a bunch of books, and people love them, and I really don't understand, to be honest.
I think one example where this is almost flipped on its head and done really well is one character in Stormlight Archives. I won't say the name because I might be spoiling it, but there's this one guy who I think in the second book you realize is kind of like a Genghis Khan character who has committed horrible atrocities, burned entire villages, but he's forgotten it because of basically a sort of spell that he asked to be put on him, and then that starts to wear off as the series carries on, and he realizes what he's done and has to come to terms with it. And he's changed as a person. Like, he's not the same man who did those things, but he really carries that weight with him and has to then start changing who he is to heal. And it's actually done very, very compellingly. And he's one of my favorite characters because he becomes so noble and so strong and loving. And I think it's actually a really beautiful mirror almost of the gospel and how transformative change can be, but it takes time. I mean, these are long books, and it takes several books for his arc to really flesh out. So I would definitely recommend that as a positive example of how you can handle a villain turning to the good side without making it cheap or cheesy.
Yeah. That's on my TBR. I guess I need to move it up a little bit now.
Yeah, something I actually thought was interesting was I wouldn't say that this book has like the perfect, like a good example necessarily of like a bad character or whatever. But Six of Crows, I thought it was interesting how like the love interest in that book, although it would be more of like again the morally gray main character, his love interest was really pushing for him to change and to be better. And I just thought that was really interesting. And I was like, we should have more of those female characters that are pushing for the male character, whether it be like if they are morally great, to be better, to change, to be different. You know what I mean? Instead of just accepting the way
Yeah.
they are.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really kills me with a lot of these relationships in book, whether it's they're just friends or there's a romantic interest, whatever. But there's always got to be some kind of like battle of the sexes going on in a lot of these stories, and the male and female characters can't ever just respect each other or just even try to understand each other. They're just constantly butting heads. And I really do just wish that like the most powerful character dynamics in romances and in friendships are when they counterbalance each other's strengths and
Mhm.
weaknesses, and they should be encouraging each other to rise above themselves and to become better. Otherwise, are you actually a good friend? Because that's the best thing a friend can do. You know, if you really care about this person, you're going to help them overcome.
Mhm. And yeah, I feel like so often we try to kind of glorify this idea that oh, it's guys against girls. Like even I think not in my house, but like the way the events and things that I went to, they always have like this girls against guys kinds of thing, and we
And
kind
it's
of grow
always
up with this
perpetuated by
idea.
women.
Hey, don't blame us. Anyway, but yeah, but it's so true, and the truth is, we're gonna be completely honest, okay, and completely raw here. The truth is women and men are made completely different. We have
Yep.
very
Yep.
different strengths. Like, put us in a
Hmm.
physical competition and we're going to lose. I can tell you, we're going to lose. I remember Nevi would come back from like youth group sometimes and she'd be like, I don't even want to join the girls' team. They're not even going to win. They think they're like, oh, we're going to win. We're going to beat the boys. And she's like, this is so dumb. We're not gonna win. Like they're like playing tug of war, and there's like
Oh
tons
my
of like
gosh.
teenage boys. I'm like, this is we're not winning. And the girl's like, we got this. I'm like, no, we don't. I'm joining the boys team. Yeah, honestly, I don't get why that like live like oh well we're just as good. It's like we are good, but like I don't understand why we need to have like this competition constantly perpetuated when we are best when we are complementing each other.
Hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would say that a lot of the problems that we even have in society today is because we have this thing where it has to be all guys or all girls. I'm like, y'all, we were made to work together, please. And honestly, a lot of problems, even in plots, like sometimes I feel like it's even frustrating, like the misunderstanding trope in some
Oh my
novels.
gosh. Don't get me started.
Oh, it's
Don't get me
horrible.
started.
Like I get it, there are misunderstandings, and I don't mind if it's a short misunderstanding to ramp up the conflict, to add it on top of some other conflict. Maybe they had like the big conflict in the plot, but added to that, man, they have a misunderstanding. Okay, we get it, but don't use
Yeah.
that for like
The
to
basis of
extend
everything.
plot. It's like, why? Especially if this character is so outspoken, they suddenly become very quiet and they don't say anything because they might get offended. Has this character done this ever before? No. But of course, we need the plot to go on because we need like
Yeah.
60 more pages for the page count. But
I know what you guys mean. There's this book that I'm reading right now as well. I mean, I have multiple books on my TBR, but and also on my currently reading. But I'm reading this legal thriller. It's sort of like a mystery. It's called Defending Jacob, and they made a show about it. And I had wanted to read this book for a long time, so the show looked really interesting. So I'm reading it, and the way that especially the way that the author writes relationships, not just like romantic relationships, but just like father son relationships, friend relationships, it's so weird. Like he seems to like think that in order to like ramp up the conflict, there has to be constant miscommunication, and in the sense where it's like there's this one chapter where the husband and wife are arguing because their son has been accused of murder, which I mean is horrible. But they're arguing about like, oh, what do we do with this? What legal proceedings do we take? All this sort of stuff. And there's so much miscommunication in that chapter. I think I counted it like maybe 9 times. The exact interaction where like this exact interaction, like you think X, and then the other person says, I never said X. That happens probably 8 or 9 times in the
Oh
whole
my gosh.
chapter. And it got so annoying to the point where I just like bookmarked it. I'm like, I'm putting this down. I'll come back later when I'm in a better mood because this is getting really annoying. But like, I mean, it's just not an effective way of conflict. It's not based in anything like, real or genuine. It's just more like, oh, she misinterpreted what he said as this, or vice versa, and that's what drives the conflict. And it's just not interesting. There's nothing about that that's interesting.
And I
Yeah.
think when you do use the miscommunication trope, the miscommunication should be very deeply related to their flaws or their fears or one of the themes that you're
Exactly.
working with.
Yes.
So it shouldn't just be something ambiguous was said that was misinterpreted. It should be because one of the characters has this deep wound or needs to overcome something. It needs to be more than just random if it's going to work, and it has to be used very sparingly.
Yeah, honestly, I'm
Absolutely.
reading a book currently. It's a romance, and it was recommended, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna read it. And I didn't have super high expectations, but the entire plot is just two people who like each other, and they both think that they're both friend zoned or whatever. And oh my goodness, I'm struggling through it because we also get both point of views, so we can tell that they are completely wrong.
Byron's eyes just went, what?
And so I'm struggling through it because
That's
I'm
a
like, I'm
roller
gonna finish
coaster of
it.
emotion right there.
Because it was recommended, I'm gonna finish it, but it's so hard to finish because there's just no motivation. They're both wrong. They That's the only like plot point, is that they are misunderstanding each other the entire time.
It's death by miscommunication.
Byron's just like dying.
I am dying. I could never finish a book like that. I wouldn't start a book like that. Like if a friend tried to get me to read that, I'd be like, no, I'm sorry, you have bad taste. Like I love you, man, but you have bad taste.
Yeah, but it's so true, honestly. And I think that honestly it all boils down whether you're creating male characters, female characters, male and female relationships, whether platonic or romantic. I think it all boils down to make them human, make them people who deeply want something, and
Hmm.
deeply want something that is either related to their past, but just make them human, just like all of us. Like, for example,
Yeah, give them a
all of us
dream.
as exactly. Yes, you hit the nail
Yeah.
on the head. I feel like even think about, okay, just in ourselves. Forget about characters. All of us want to be writers, right? We want to be published. We want to share our stories with the world. But we all have a deeply rooted reason why we want to do it. And that
Hmm.
reason why is exactly what pushes us even when we're tired. We're like, I don't want to do this. I want to quit, but we keep going. Why? Because we have a reason that's pushing us. For you, Byron, it's because you want to have more stories for your siblings, and for children like that, like your siblings who want to read that, for example. And honestly, we just need a deeply rooted motivation, and I feel like a lot of things fall into place. Just write stories that are true to who you are. And something that I've learned, because sometimes especially when I was younger, I used to overcomplicate, which is typical of me. I overcomplicate everything, but I used to overcomplicate plot. I was like, oh my goodness, I have to have at this point, I have to have this point, this percentage. Am I getting all the percentages right? And then I remember when I was telling my dad, and he was like, you know what? Just write a good story. Just write something that's interesting or something. And there was also a class on master class. I haven't read this guy's books, but Salman Rushdie, I think his name is. He gave a piece of advice that I've never forgotten, and it's completely transformed the way that I write. And he said, just keep it interesting. And I'm like, oh, that makes things like so much easier. Just write something that you would want to
Yeah.
read if you were a reader. Whenever I'm stuck, I'm like, okay, what would I want to happen at this point? And I think really at the bottom of it all, we write from the deepest parts of ourselves. So like some of my best writing has come out of moments of literally grieving a family member and having to write a death scene in my character, and literally just pouring my heart out and writing something that's realistic. sometimes some of those characters are a reflection of me, even though they're maybe 60 years old and an old man who lives in colonial Spanish America. That's not me, but a lot of what I felt and the motivations why they do things come from things that I've done myself. And it just keeps everything real and very, very human. And I think when we write from that deep humanity, from that deepest part within ourselves, and we write, like Ernest Hemingway said, the truest sentence we can write, just writing one true sentence after another. I think we can really write something beautiful, because I think God created us to be human. And even though we are fallen, we're always longing. We're always have that dream of being healed, of being redeemed. And that's why, like,
Mhm.
redemption stories, like you were saying, Chris, are just so impactful and beautiful. We don't expect characters to be great or amazing from the get-go. In fact, I think that's what frustrates, at least me. It frustrates me
Yeah,
when
no
we
one
have
wants to marry
characters.
Sue.
Exactly. We don't want perfect characters. Even if the conflict has to do with man versus society instead of like man versus man or man versus himself. Um, Even then, the character must learn something, because we as humans don't go through situations without learning something. We don't go without changing. We grow. And when we grow, we change. We must change. We must hopefully become better people, or in a negative arc, we become worse people. But at the same time, in a way, we sometimes become better because we learn certain lessons. So, like, for example, I love the story of Samson in the Bible just because it's such a beautiful picture, I think, of a well done narrative arc where, yes, Samson kind of has like this, he has like all these victories and things like that, but then he has this massive defeat, and at the same time he has a kind of victory because he essentially fulfills the thing that he was sent to do, but at the same time it's his death. Like, he commits like suicide to be able to complete his goal. And
Yeah.
yeah, I honestly just think that it's all about just writing human characters.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people, not just in like, the writing world, but also the reading world, just sometimes just don't understand, like, wait, why did this have to happen in a book? Or like, I don't like that. But there's a reason why. I know for me, there's a death scene at pretty much at the very beginning of my book. And
I heard some people complaining about that.
there are people who complain about it jokingly and, like, send me fake sarcastic messages, and we just laugh about it.
Yeah.
But there have been a few people who were genuinely upset, like genuinely angry, and claimed that it didn't add anything to the story, or if this didn't happen, then the story would have moved at the exact same pace. Everything would have happened the exact same way. And I know in my own mind, I'm like, no, that's not true. The main reason why this had to happen was for the main character's sort of internal journey, and to sort of, kick that off, and 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 such. But like I said, even in the reading world, some people just don't, they just don't grasp it anymore. Which I feel like in the past, people used to be able to grasp that a lot more, and understand things like that. I don't know. I have no idea what's changed. Maybe it's just the development of, like, people aren't as attention span is not as long, or people look for what they want in a story instead of, something that, might actually teach them something. And even in the writing world, there are people who put stuff in their stories without, real reason why. And there's sort of like a weakness to that, I think. But also, it can be done well. There can be points where you add something in your story that doesn't necessarily add something to the story, but, it's just a nice detail. But there are sometimes people who add things to the story. Like, let's go back to the example of a character death. I mean, people will add a character death randomly for shock value, and it doesn't add anything to the story. And you're like, okay,
Mhm.
that doesn't actually make sense. Like, you go back and you read through it, and you're like, what this was purely for shock value. This character was clearly created just to be killed off.
Yeah.
And that's not, in my own opinion, I don't think that's a great reason to kill off a character. If you're going to kill a character, it needs to be for some sort of internal journey, or like have merit within the
Mhm.
story. Like, yeah, I mean, that was kind of a ramble, but
Yeah.
so yeah.
Going back to the Samson example, I was recently published in a book with a group of other Christian authors. We created a project called Lawless, and two of the other authors split up Samson's story. So they wrote kind of two halves of it, slightly different takes with like slightly different characters. So it was interesting seeing that approach. But it was those two stories were the hardest stories for me to read in that anthology, because it basically reimagined the Book of Judges as being set in a sci-fi dystopian world, maybe a little bit similar to the Mandalorian, kind of like sci-fi Western vibes. And the Book of Judges is really dark, which is part of why we chose to tackle it, because there's just so much depravity, and yet God also works through people's brokenness. And I actually had to skip pages in one of the Samson stories just because the content was like above what I was comfortable with. But reading the book in the Bible, I'm like, this is all there. Like, it's there's prostitution, there's abuse, there's extreme violence. He's being with girls he really should not be with, which then creates an even worse cycle of violence. And yet that book exists in the Bible for a reason. And even though Samson is probably actually the epitome of what manhood should not be, I think he's in there for a reason, because it points towards the true Redeemer and the true Savior, the true King, who is Christ, even despite that brokenness. So yeah.
Do you ever read a book and think, oh my goodness, that would make an incredible movie? Yeah, me too. I don't know if it's because I have a soft spot for film and screenwriting, but I am always so delighted to find books that have yet to be made into movies. I feel like I can see every detail of the cinematography, hear every note of the score, every minuscule expression on the actors' faces. It's incredible. I love being able to see that movie in my mind. One of the books, believe it or not, that I am shocked has not become a TV series yet is actually the Book of Judges from the Bible. I mean, talk about a wild book. Whenever someone isn't being knocked dead in a bizarrely creative way, there is always some scandal brewing beneath the surface. Actually, did you know that a group of Christian writers saw the immense potential in these stories and wrote a retelling of the Book of Judges? Together, they've gathered 14 different short stories inspired by selected stories from the Book of Judges. These tales are all set in the same dystopian sci-fi Western universe. Covenant, a post-apocalyptic dystopian Earth where technological advancement has come to a jarring halt and resources are scarce. The Journeymen, a group of people chosen by a mysterious deity called Donum Donaire, must struggle through the treacherous deserts inhabited by two tyrannical tribes, the Fierce Desperados and the Order of Cosmoa. The Journeymen must fight against destruction and the desires of the world around them as they strive to survive. Inspired by the Book of Judges, watch as Donum Donaire chooses the most unlikely heroes to show down with demons, triumph over armies, and fight the galactic battles that rage around and in them. This groundbreaking anthology features a short story by today's guest, Chris Babcock, and his brother, Jonathan Babcock. Lawless is now available on Amazon and sold by all major retailers, and you can snag your own copy today by visiting lawlessbook.com. That's lawlessbook.com, or by clicking the link in the show notes below. Hey there, lovely listeners. I have the most fantastic opportunity to share with you today. How would you like to join the street team for Novelists in November short story collection featuring my very own short story, which you'll be the first to discover the title and story blurb if you join? This enchanting anthology is launching this November, and I'd be absolutely delighted to have you join us. Picture this: dark academia vibes, cozy sweaters, rain pattering on your window, and all your favorite bookish feels with a mug of hot tea or pumpkin latte. That's the essence of this collection. By joining our street team, you'll get exclusive behind-the-scenes info, early access to the cover, sneak peeks of the stories, first dibs on pre-orders, and some very special gifts I'm personally designing just for you. And the best part? There are no requirements. It's super flexible to fit your schedule. We're planning an exciting cover reveal in June and story and title reveal earlier in the month. Plus, you'll get an early ebook copy of the anthology and see our book cover before anyone else. So, if you would love to be part of this cozy autumnal adventure, click the link in the show notes and join the rest of our bookish friends on the street team, or visit bio.site/ShiraJRodriguez. That's bio.site/ShiraJRodriguez. Thank you so much for your incredible support and enthusiasm. I'm truly grateful for you, and I can't wait to see you on the team. Hey there, listeners. Before we dive back into today's episode, I want to take a quick moment to talk about something really important. Reviews are the lifeblood of any podcast. They not only let us know what you're loving about the show, but also help others discover the beauty of living, giving, and repeating. So if you're enjoying the content we're putting out, here's a small favor I'd love to ask. Could you take just a minute or two to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform? Whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other platform you listen on, your reviews make a world of difference. By leaving a review, you're not just sharing your thoughts with us, but you're also helping us climb the charts and reach more listeners who might benefit from our discussions. Plus, it's a wonderful way to show your support for the content you love. So friends, if you're finding value, inspiration, or even just a good laugh in any of these episodes, please consider dropping a review. It only takes a moment, but it means the world to us. And hey, if you want to go the extra mile, share the podcast with your friends, family, or anyone you think would benefit from these conversations. Together, we can create a community of listeners who are engaged, inspired, and ready to take on the world. All right, that's enough from me. Let's get back to the show. Thanks for being the wonderful, lovely, incredible listeners you are. And as always, enjoy the episode.
Yeah, I'll just quickly point out, I love that he said that, and it's kind of ironic actually, if you realize that in Hebrews, Samson is actually in the list of the heroes of the faith, which is crazy.
Mhm.
But I think that
Yeah.
it's almost like a way of God showing that nobody's too lost to be found. And
Mhm.
I think that even those broken characters can have a redemption arc.
Mhm.
And often instead of I think that the whole morally gray character, it's actually, I like to see it as an opportunity to
Mhm.
create something different and unexpected and something beautiful out of it, where instead of keeping the morally gray character as a flat arc or an
Yeah.
arc that somebody that just never really realizes where they are, somebody that is so overcome by their depravity that they're like, I can't even stand this anymore, somebody please help me. And those, I love this quote from, I think it's the Count of Monte Cristo or something like that, that it's only when we experience the deepest or darkest despair, that's when we can experience the greatest joy in life, because the
Mhm.
contrast is so strong. And I've found that so helpful in writing, because it just kind of balances the narrative out, and character arcs as well. Whenever you have your character go through a dark moment, there is so much potential for hope. If you know how to wield it well, you can actually create sometimes more beauty and more hope than books that have an everything is all right, everything's sunny, no, nothing's happened
Mhm.
kind of
Yeah.
story.
Okay, that was a wild ride. We went all the way from strong male characters and what guys would like to see in literature, all the way to morally gray characters and anti-heroes, and how to create characters who are dealing with moral dilemmas, but who can actually portray this in a way that is not hopeless and dark, but instead creates an avenue for the writer to be able to write redemption and write hope and weave it into their stories. I think it was so much fun also to be able to talk about the relationships, both platonic and romantic, and kind of be able to nail down what we're doing wrong in our books today, because so often we get our character chemistry wrong because we have the wrong idea of what roles men and women are supposed to play. And it was just so wonderful to be able to hear these guys and just be able to discuss this in a really wonderful, healthy way. And truly, I learned so much from them. Apart from also laughing, this episode, I laughed so hard. Again. Definitely join us next time, because we're going to be talking about what you would say to yourself as a younger writer if you could go back and say only one thing. I asked these guys what they would say, and I can't wait for you to hear their answers. We're also going to dive into what I think is the number one way to grow your craft by leaps and bounds, and something that nobody really talks about. I'll leave you on a cliffhanger for that one. So If you want to find out what that is, definitely join us next week for another episode of Her Reading Life podcast. Until next time, friends, continue to live, give, and repeat, and I'll see you next week. Yay! You did it! I'm giving you a lovely big virtual hug because you just finished another episode of Her Reading Life podcast. If you'd like to access all the wonderful links I mentioned in this episode, visit my website at bio.site/ShiraJRodriguez. That's bio.site/ShiraJRodriguez. There you can access my blog posts, resources, and so much more. Also, check out my Instagram page for more inspirational content. And join my email list for insider secrets and exclusive updates on special events. The links are in the description box below. Also, if you could take a minute and leave a review for this podcast, that would be amazing. We're able to reach so many more people because of your reviews and ratings. I can't wait to chat with you next time, friends. Keep living, giving, and repeating.